Okay, so the mechanoreceptive input, right, which derives from specialized afferents that are called mechanoreceptors, and also proprioceptors, right, like the Golgi tendon organs and the muscle spindles that tell you, where you're located in space, and how your muscles are extended and where your joints are, and all the Meissners and Pacinians and the Raffinis and the Merkels, all of these mechanoreceptors that are telling you if you've touched something, if you're gripping something, what the texture of something is it vibrating? All that mechanoreceptive positional kind of information is going to work its way into the dorsal root, where the cell bodies are, and then work their way up, the same ipsilateral side at the back of the spinal cord, forming those great big dorsal columns, right, of mechanoreceptive and proprioceptive somatosensory information input. And then they're going to synapse first in the brain stem, and then those next neurons in the brainstem nuclei are going to decussate, right, cross to the contralateral side. Their axons are going to rise up and synapse in the thalamus, and then you're going to get, again, projections to this mapping of the contralateral side of the body in terms of mechanoreception and proprioception in the primary somatosensory cortex, or S1 in parietal lobe. In contrast, all that emotionally salient input, like for example, nociception, detection of tissue damage, and thermoreception, and also sensual touch and itch, things that require some sort of reflexive responses often are going to travel a different route. They're going to come in also through the same dorsal roots of the spinal nerves. Their cell bodies are going to be in there in the dorsal root ganglia, but their axons are going to go and make initially a synapse in the dorsal horn, the gray matter of the cord, so that they can form reflexive, kinds of networks to, withdraw you, for example, from injury or extreme heat. Then the next cells of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord are going to decussate, cross, right? And they're going to rise, their axons are going to rise both towards the front of the cord, so in the anterior direction, and also to the side of the cord, to the lateral direction. So this is called the anterolateral system, right? And it's going to go to places like the brainstem, where it'll help you to orient, to the source of the injury or, the burn. It'll also wake up. These are sort of the everything's coming from the spinal cord for this anterolateral system, but this is the mesencephalic and the spino-reticular, projections. And then there's also a spino, it's going to cross over, decussate, work its way up, and go straight up to the thalamus before projecting into a different lobe, right? This is going to be the insular lobe, sort of deep within that lateral fissure in the brain. Well, your experience of your body, your perceptual experience involves not just positional, and proprioceptive, mechanoreceptive aspects that are initially arriving in cortex at the parietal lobe, and not just the emotionally salient aspects of like your visceral inputs, your injury, your temperature, if you're itchy, all those things, which arrives primarily, initially at the insular lobe. So how do you put the body together? Well, it turns out that the mechanoreceptive, proprioceptive information that gets there really quick, right? Because it's this one cable going all the way up to the brainstem, all myelinated. That's going to be shared in parietal lobe, right, with visual information that's coming from the occipital lobe. So you're going to be merging visual and somatosensory inputs at the level of the parietal lobe. Also vestibular information about, acceleration, both linear and sort of angular acceleration, is also going to be integrated here. So there's a lot of regions here that are involved in sort of integrating, various inputs that pertain to the position and the movement of the body. This is what we call, the where pathway here. It's got significant sort of visual information coming in here too. Where is my body, and where is it in relationship to things that I might touch or grab or pick up or something, right? And so there are areas like, for example, S2, which is secondary somatosensory cortex. That's also, going to be receiving some of this, parietally arriving mechanoreceptive and proprioceptive information. And it turns out that S2 is actually heavily interconnected with the insular lobe. So the information, the details about where my body is positioned and, what I'm touching, for example, it arrives initially in the parietal lobe, but it will get shared with the insular lobe, with the maps in the insular lobe that are directly receiving the information about emotionally salient inputs like, am I injured? Am I hot? Am I itchy? Etc. And the insular lobe then contains a pretty highly developed, map of our bodies in terms of, all of these aspects of somatosensation. And the insula is heavily interconnected with the frontal lobes. And the frontal lobes are critically important, for social decision making. And when you make a social decision, you feel it. Should I do this? No, I shouldn't. You can actually feel it in your body. And, should I do this? Yes. You can sort of feel that aspect of it too. So that those links between the sort of highly developed, kind of cortical mapping of the body in terms of its position, in terms of how it feels, etc., that ultimately ends up, in the insula, is going to share that information and, help to drive behavior, via its interconnections with networks in the